Hi, everyone. My name is Heidi, and welcome to another week of Family Search live streams. Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Julia Anderson, who is a family history expert. And Julia, thank you so much for your time today. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. I am a research specialist at the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. I manage the United States and Canada research team, and it's a wonderful team. If you ever get a chance to come to the library and interact with some of my team members, you will love it. I have a master's degree in history and education,
Oh, my
and I'm an
goodness.
accredited genealogist and an accredited genealogist lecturer. I also teach classes for Salt Lake Community College. They have an online certificate program that I've been teaching in for about 10 years. And
Oh, my
I,
goodness.
I just
That's a
love to
long
help people.
time.
Yeah, I love to help people learn about their families and learn how to research and connect people throughout the generations. So I'm excited to be here today to talk about cemetery records.
Thanks so much, Julia. Julia, as a teacher and someone that is always trying to inspire youth or just different types of students from different backgrounds to engage with family history, what do you think is your favorite part about that?
I love seeing the excitement in people's eyes when they realize that they can find stories and records about their family that they don't know anything about yet. And just that the joy of discovery and connection is beyond amazing. I love that.
That's so wonderful. It's so neat to hear that same excitement that that people like me there aren't really official family history certified individuals uh, are just excited to learn about their family history, and that's so neat that you get to do that for a living.
I know.
Julia, a
I,
little
I
bit
have to
about.
pinch myself.
Oh, yeah, I know, it's just like, you wake up every morning, you're like, "I get to help people." That's so wonderful, and welcome to all of you that are joining us. We have almost 100 people already. It's only been 2 minutes. Tell us where you're watching from, and tell us of an ancestor that you might be interested in learning more about. Julia, tell us a little bit about what should people expect today in your live stream and all that you have prepared for them?
Well, today I'm going to review the history and background of cemeteries and cemetery records and why they're valuable for family history research. And I'm going to show you how to use the records and where to find them. And then I have a little case study at the end to show how it works in real life.
That's so exciting. Guys, if you're like me where you have ancestors or are looking for ancestors and cemeteries are a huge resource. And Julia, I love that you're going to be focusing on this. And I have so much to learn. And for those of you that are tuning in, feel free to ask those questions about cemeteries as they come up or any type of record. We'll make sure that Julia or someone from the Family Search Library can answer your questions in the comments. So again, tell us where you're watching from, what questions you have, and what ancestor you're researching right now. I know that changes depending on the day and depending on your journey, but we'd love to hear from you. Julia, thank you so much for your time today, and let's get started.
All right, fantastic. See if I can get my slides to move. There we go. So death is not something people often like to talk about, but about 8,000 people in the United States die every day. So, for practical reasons, when they die, their remains need to be taken care of in a timely manner to prevent disease, odor, and the attraction of scavenging animals. So, there are typically two options for this. One is cremation and one is burial. Various cultures and religions tend to advocate or prefer one over the other, and death is often associated with various religious ceremonies. Both cremated and buried deceased persons can be memorialized in cemeteries. The United States has an estimated 145,000 cemeteries, although there may be many more that we just don't know about. They vary in size, location, purpose, and patronage, but each one is considered a sacred protected space and a final resting place for those who have finished their earthly sojourns. Cemeteries often contain monuments for the deceased inscribed with genealogical information like their name, birth date, death date, and other details. The governing bodies of cemeteries, like other organizations, generally keep additional records, and those records can be particularly valuable for genealogists, especially when they're used in conjunction with other genealogical source material. So as I mentioned, my objectives for today's presentation are to review the history and background of cemeteries and cemetery records in the United States and characterize their genealogical value. I will also demonstrate where to find the records and how to use them, and then I'll finish with a case study showing how cemetery records can help solve research problems. Throughout the history of the United States, people have used various types of cemeteries for laying their deceased family members to rest. The first type I would like to discuss is the church cemeteries or graveyards. Often these terms are used interchangeably. Before the mid-1800s, churches were often built with enough land around them to serve as a burial place for the church members. And typically, those that were interred there were members of that particular church. And the church leaders might have laid out very specific rules regarding who could be buried there, and even where in the graveyard they could be laid to rest. They may also have had rules about the size of headstones or monuments, the types of inscriptions they could include, and the direction the stones faced. The land was essentially sheltered by the church and was considered hallowed ground or a sacred place. Families who attended the same church for generations could have a large number of relatives buried there. Occasionally, as today, a schism divided church congregations, causing some of the members to move to a new church or even start their own church. So some extended families may be interred in separate church graveyards. If a church was long abandoned, the land, including the cemetery, might have been repurposed and graves moved or even just covered up. Records of burials in a church cemetery or graveyard were often kept at the church in burial registers, and they may still be there in the church today. They could also have been moved to another repository or archive, or even have been passed down to descendants of the original church clergy. Other common cemeteries you'll find in the United States are family cemeteries. These were generally established in rural areas, and most families created a private burial site when they first arrived in a new location. These family plots were often used by extended family members as long as they remained in the area, or until the land was sold to a new owner. The new owner may or may not have taken care of the old cemetery and may even have forgotten where it was, as it became covered with vegetation, bushes, and vines over a period of time. Family plots were sometimes enclosed with a fence or trees, and perhaps they were on a small rise or hill in view of the family home. They could also be located on the edge of the property, in a wood, or in another secluded area. Monuments were often homemade from available materials, such as wood or stone, if they existed at all. Records of burials in family plots may only exist in family Bibles, letters, and the memories of their loved ones. Fortunately, many historical and genealogical societies recognize the value of recording the locations of many of these cemeteries, as well as transcribing information on surviving headstones. And then they publish their findings in newsletters, books, and journals. A third common type of U.S. cemetery is the city cemetery. These are public property open to the burial of those who lived in the area, regardless of any religious denomination they may have had. Some cities may have had more than one public cemetery, depending on the population and size of the area. This type of cemetery often has the greatest variety in the style and type of monuments, inscriptions, and information available, because the people buried therein are generally unrelated and they come from various backgrounds. At times, city cemeteries may have been segregated by race, nationality, religion, or even the standard of living. Knowing the history of a community can be helpful in identifying whether a particular cemetery was segregated or not. Records of city cemeteries could have been kept in burial registers or cemetery books and may still be kept by the cemetery, or they might have been transferred to some other local government repository. Military cemeteries are also common in the United States. Two main types of military cemeteries are post cemeteries and national cemeteries. Post cemeteries are located at army posts or forts and served mainly those who died in a particular military battle or war. Often, soldiers who died during a conflict were buried in shallow graves on or near a battlefield and were later disinterred or dug up and moved to a post cemetery as their final resting place. Headstones in these cemeteries are generally uniform with exact specifications for the inscriptions. National cemeteries are federally operated and are generally reserved for veterans, military personnel, their spouses, and their minor children. Since 1903, headstones at each national cemetery must be exactly 39 inches tall, 12 inches wide, and 4 inches thick. The final type of U.S. cemetery I would like to highlight today is the commercial memorial park. These non-sectarian grounds are private property operated by a company as a business. Memorial parks are designed to be peaceful places to visit, and they often have trails, open grassy areas, benches, and places for quiet reflection. Usually when people are buried at memorial parks, they have flat headstones that don't obstruct the view. It is also common to have cremated remains placed in a columbarium, or to have a memorial statue erected instead of an actual interment. In your cemetery research, you'll likely come across these common types of burial or interment sites: graves, crypts, mausoleums, tombs, vaults, drawers, and columbariums. So let's take a look at some of the unique characteristics of each of these. A grave is a hole carefully dug in the ground to make a place to put the coffin or casket containing the deceased person's remains. Burial was traditionally deep enough to prevent the grave from being disturbed by animals or people. A crypt is typically a room or vault, usually underground, that can be used as a burial place. A crypt is often located underneath the floor of a church. A mausoleum is an above-ground building that is usually decorative and has places within to inter the dead. It may also include a small chapel. The burial chamber inside could either be above ground or below. A tomb is an enclosure for the remains of a deceased person. It can be above ground or below, or cut into the side of a hill or carved out of a rock. These were very common anciently, as can be seen in the ancient royal tombs at Petra in the Middle East. A vault is a metal or concrete enclosure, generally lining a grave, in which a casket is laid during burial. It protects the casket from the weight of the earth on top of the grave. Vaults help prevent graves from sinking, and they also stabilize headstones. Many modern cemeteries actually require the use of a vault. Some cemeteries and mausoleums contain drawers in which to place the remains of a deceased person. Other items could also be placed in the drawer before it is sealed closed. A columbarium is an above-ground building or wall in a cemetery with niches for urns and other containers of cremated remains. A plaque may be placed on the wall to memorialize the person's final resting place. So now that we've covered some of the basic types of cemeteries and burial sites that you might encounter in your research, let's review different types of cemetery records and their genealogical value. Some common types of cemetery records are monuments, applications for military headstones, interment cards, burial ledgers or cemetery books, deeds, permits, and records of funerals. So let's look at some examples of each one. Monuments are fascinating records because they can be very unique, often remain in their original locations indefinitely, and they contain vital information that might not be located anywhere else. Some common types of monuments include headstones, footstones, cairns, megaliths, ledgers, boxes, and cenotaphs. Of the many different types of monuments, headstones usually provide the most direct evidence because they state a person's name, their birth date, death date, and other information. Other monuments, while not as directly helpful, can provide contextual clues in solving family mysteries. It is important to note who is interred near your ancestors, the types of memorials they have, the purpose and type of the cemetery, and the location of the final resting place, as well as any other details or clues. Headstones are one of the most common cemetery records you'll find. They're generally erected at the head of a person's grave and give the deceased person's name, death date, and other vital information. They can also include artwork and symbols that have specific meanings. Symbols can indicate military service, a particular religion, organization memberships, age, marital status, and even ethnicity. Some headstones even give the hometown of immigrants the names of children or parents, places of marriage, and original spellings of surnames that may have become Americanized. Poetry, paragraphs, proverbs, and other sayings may also be etched into a headstone, indicating that the living cared deeply about the legacy of their deceased family members. You never really know what you might discover when you locate a headstone. So here's a monument for Caroline H. Cutter, who died on September 18, 1838, and was buried in the Elm Street Cemetery in Milford, Hillsborough County, New Hampshire. It reads, Caroline H., wife of Calvin Cutter, M.D., murdered by the Baptist ministry and Baptist churches as follows. September 28, 1838, aged 33. She was accused of lying in church meeting by the Reverend D.D. Pratt and Deacon Albert Adams, was condemned by the church unheard. She was reduced to poverty by Deacon William Wallace when an ex parte council was asked of the Milford Baptist Church by the advice of their committee, George Raymond, Calvin Averill, and Andrew Hutchinson. They voted not to receive any communication on the subject. The Reverend Mark Carpenter said he thought, as the good old deacon said, "We've got Cutter down, and it's best to keep him down." The intentional and malicious destruction of her character and happiness, as above described, destroyed her life. Her last words upon the subject were, "Tell the truth, and the iniquity will come out." So all of that is inscribed on this one headstone. Clearly, Caroline's husband wanted everyone to know how he felt about the treatment of his wife by their erstwhile clergy. Another unusual headstone, one for Waite Tripp in Newport, Newport County, Rhode Island, states, Waite, daughter of William and Desire Tripp, died April 24th, 1780, aged 10 months, 10 days. Also, William, their son, died March 7th, 1784, aged 22 months. Also, his wife's arm amputated February 20th, 1786. Notice the inset carving of an arm in the center of the headstone. While some headstones are filled with genealogical and biographical information, others simply state the person's first name, only a date, or like this example from Salem Cemetery in Franklin County, Ohio, infant. Another type of monument you may see in a cemetery is a footstone. This could have the person's initials, a relationship or poem, or simply be blank. Its purpose was to mark the foot of the grave or the end of the burial plot. Sometimes the headstone and footstone together can resemble the head and foot of a bedstead. A family burial plot within a cemetery may have one large stone for the entire family, and then footstones to mark the individual graves. These are easiest to distinguish when the entire plot is encased in a fence or other enclosure. A cairn is a small decorative pile of rocks to mark a location or direction. Sometimes one is placed to mark the final resting place of an individual, but no other information is given. A megalith is a very large rock used to mark a burial location. Some of these remain from ancient times. A ledger is a large flat stone that covers the entire cemetery plot. It may or may not be engraved. They were thought to provide extra protection for the grave and the remains inside. A box grave is essentially a stone coffin that sits above the ground. These were especially popular in places where there is a high water table or the ground was difficult to penetrate, making traditional burial difficult or impossible. Others simply did not want to be buried underground. A cenotaph is a monument for individuals who are buried elsewhere. It was common for families who lost a member at sea to erect a cenotaph in a nearby cemetery. War memorials are a type of cenotaph to recognize all who lost their lives in a particular conflict. This image is of a cenotaph memorial for those who died at the Alamo, March 6, 1836, in the defense of Texas. In addition to monuments, there are many other types of cemetery records that are beneficial in genealogical research. Headstone applications for military veterans are one kind of record that can provide many details about a person's life and family. The National Archives holds copies of these records, which have been digitized and are available online. This series consists of applications for headstones for deceased members and veterans of the U.S. Army. These documents include the name of the deceased, the unit designation, serial number, dates of service, date of death, and place of burial. Headstones could be requested for veterans of the American Revolutionary War, the Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. This example is for Charlie C. Cooper, who served in World War I. It gives his name, his enlistment and discharge dates, his service number, and the claim number for his widow's pension. It also gives information about his military service, his birth and death dates, his religion, and the applicant's name, address, signature, and the date of the application. The applicant was usually a family member. Here it is Mrs. Dell Cooper. It also gives the name of the cemetery, the type of headstone, the name of the person who would be transporting the stone, and the date the stone was received. Additional information can also be found on the back of the card. You never know what notes might be included, so make sure you always look at the back. These are usually not indexed and must be located by clicking on the next image in the series. Another type of cemetery record is the interment card. These were created to serve as an index of information gathered from various sources. This example is for Julia Howell, who was buried in the Magnolia Cemetery in Mobile, Alabama. It gives her age at death and the date she was buried, including the location of her grave. And it notes that the information came from the cemetery records book. So the next thing I would want to look at would be that cemetery records book in Mobile to see if it had additional information. So this is the cemetery records book or burial register from Magnolia Cemetery in Mobile. And this is the entry for Julia Howell. You can see that her information here is the same as it was on the interment card, but it also has the addition of Julia's gender, which was female, her color, which was noted as black, as well as the permit number and the full name of the undertaker. I think this register is more legible than the interment card index. While these are minor additions, these are important details for identifying the correct person in other records. Cemetery books for the same cemetery in Mobile, Alabama in 1913 show an entry for the expenses of Michael Burns on behalf of his son Andrew S. Although this record gives no vital information, it notes the very important father-son relationship. Based on the items purchased for the funeral, we can also extract evidence of the family's standard of living and imagine what the funeral rites might have included. If he had not been enumerated in census records prior to his death, this might have been the only record of the existence of Andrew S. Burns, son of Michael Burns. Here are some other examples from a cemetery register from Gila County, Arizona. Note in this entry for Anton Victus Antoniel that it not only does it give his name, birth date, and death date, but it also gives the name of a hometown in Italy, the names and birthplaces of his father and mother, as well as his wife's name, and it states that his body was shipped by auto to Florence, Arizona for burial. This entry for Frank Jesse Bacon gives less vital information, but notes that he was murdered at the head of Devil's Canyon at the age of 20, and that his body was subsequently shipped to Phoenix. Yet another example from the same cemetery states that Ralph Sanger Dubois Jr., a rancher, died in Kearney, Arizona in 1986 at the age of 46. It names his survivors, including his wife, son, daughter, father, and mother, as well as where they were living. And then the record notes the following: these people at this time have no headstones erected for them in any cemetery. Whether they will in the future, only time will tell. This statement alone demonstrates the importance of looking for all cemetery and death records that may be extant for an individual. Cemetery deeds are just like other land deeds, except the plots of land are generally much smaller. As you can see here, this deed includes a legal description of the land, which is lot number 159 fronting Birch Street, part of the west side addition to the cemetery. The amount paid for it, which was $72, that it was purchased solely for a burying ground. It includes the date of the purchase, which was June 17th, 1914, and any transfers that happened after the original purchase. In this case, W.D. Dykes sold the north half of the plot to Mrs. J.H. Boyd on December 5th, 1914, about 6 months after his original purchase. Mrs. Boyd may have been a relative or other associate. It was common, beginning in the 20th century, for local governments to require burial permits. Here is an example of one from Mesa, Arizona in 1925. It was for the burial of the stillborn baby of Jesse Brimhall, and gives the place of burial, the east half of Lot 4 in Block 169. It also states that it was the second grave from the north. This is very helpful information, especially if there was no headstone erected and no death certificate. Some cemeteries also keep track of funeral records. These can include a wealth of family information. Here's a typical example. This is the record of the funeral of Noah Brimhall. He died at Mesa, Arizona on December 9th, 1918 at 9:45 p.m. At his death, he was 92 years, 9 months, and 23 days old. His birth date was February 14th, and no year was given. His father was listed as Sylvanus Brimhall. Much of the other genealogical information provided for on the form was not known. Noah was married and was working as a farmer. Funeral services were given at the gravesite by Bishop Hunsaker. The document also gives the final cost of the funeral, $145, and who paid for it. You can see that even though all the information on the form was not filled out, it still contains a great deal more than what was included on the headstone. Here is a similar funeral record from Napa County, California, and instead of it being held by the cemetery, it is specific to the Treadway and Wigger Funeral Home. The deceased person was Dayton M. Gardner, whose funeral was held on August 20th, 1921. His place of death was listed as France in 1918, 3 years earlier. The cause of death was DWRIA, which stands for Died of Wounds Received in Action. The record also states that he was single and born on September 21st, no year stated, in California, was a Protestant, and his parents were Charles M. Gardner and Emma Kester, both of California. There was no charge for his funeral because he was killed in action in World War I, and payment was made by the government. The information on Dayton's funeral record led me to the application for a headstone filled out by his mother. The headstone was not shipped until June 29, 1936, nearly 18 years after Dayton's death and 15 years after his funeral. I also found 2 notices in a local newspaper from 1918 reporting Dayton's death. They state that his father, C.M. Gardner, received a telegram stating that Dayton had been wounded in battle on October 4th and died on October 6th. Both articles state that he was a native of Oregon, but the funeral record said he was born in California. This would be something requiring additional research to determine which, if either, was actually correct. One headline also states that Dayton's name was Fred, which could have been a nickname or simply an error on the part of the newspaper. Either way, it gives me more clues for further research. Here is another example of a funeral record. This one is a register from Alabama. This entry states that Kate L. Major died on February 4th, 1915 in Daphne, Alabama. 4 years later, her body was disinterred, which means they unburied her. Her remains were then shipped by train to Chicago under the supervision of Mrs. Gladys Bartholomew. For the cost of $100, the cemetery had disinterred the body, secured necessary permits, and placed the remains in a metal-lined box, hermetically sealed it and soldered it closed, then shipped it to its destination. Knowing where Kate died led us to her death certificate. This identified her birthplace as Brooklyn, New York, and her parents as Abraham H. and Olivia Carrick, both of England. She had lived in Daphne, Alabama for 5 years prior to her death. In the 1910 U.S. federal census, Kate L. Major was living with her husband, William J. Major, and their daughter Gladys in Daphne, Alabama. This record tells us that Kate was born in New York and her parents were Irish. Gladys was born in Illinois. In 1920, William and his daughter Gladys were living in Chicago. William worked for the railroad and was listed as a widower. Knowing this, it makes sense that William and Gladys would have wanted to retrieve the remains of their wife and mother from Alabama, as they had permanently resettled in Chicago. It is interesting that Gladys was enumerated in the census as Gladys Major, a single woman, when she was likely the person named Gladys Bartholomew who retrieved Kate's remains the previous year. Again, this gives us even more clues for future research. Knowing a little about her family and background from the cemetery and census records helped me to locate a marriage announcement for Kate L. Carrick, eldest daughter of Abraham H. Carrick, Esquire, and William J. Major, only son of John Major, Esquire. The couple married in Jersey City, New Jersey. Interestingly, the announcement was published in the Belfast newsletter in Northern Ireland. Remembering that Kate's parents were listed as Irish in the 1910 census, this provides a possible location to look for additional records. Information from the newspaper next led me to the marriage record of Kate Leonard Carrick and William James Major in Jersey City, New Jersey on July 7, 1873. William's parents were listed as John and Sarah, and Kate's as Abram H. and Olivia Carrick. This matches the other evidence I found. Information in the marriage record then led to the Carrick family cemetery plot in the Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York. Kate was not listed as having been interred there, but many other family members were, and their records could help me extend her family tree. Now that we've discussed what cemetery records may contain, as well as their genealogical value, especially when used in conjunction with other records, you probably want to locate them for your ancestors. So let's take a look at some of the places you can find them. The easiest way to access cemetery records is by searching online. Some of the most common websites to look at are findagrave.com, billiongraves.com, interment.net, namesandstone.com, ancestry.com, and familysearch.org. And the links for all of these websites are listed in the handout. Probably the most well-known of cemetery websites is findagrave.com. Its mission is to help people from all over the world work together to find, record, and present final disposition information as a virtual cemetery experience. This information is crowdsourced as individuals, societies, organizations, and others photograph gravestones in cemeteries and around the world, and then they post the information on the website. Others can add details to each memorial and upload documents like obituaries and death certificates. Sometimes they include source information, but many times they don't. They can also link people to family members who are already on Find a Grave. One of my favorite features of Find a Grave is that it allows me to search a cemetery for everyone buried there and filter my search to just those with the same surname. Another popular cemetery website is billiongraves.com. Its goal states that they want to preserve precious records found in cemeteries throughout the world. It is unique because they capture images of headstones with their GPS locations, so users worldwide can access those records anywhere. I also really like that it tells me what graves are near the one I'm looking at. Interment.net is a publisher of cemetery transcriptions for use by genealogists and local historians. They include burial records from government agencies, as well as churches, genealogical, and historical groups. According to their website, many of the transcriptions published here are cemeteries that no longer exist. Hence, interment.net provides a place where cemeteries can be preserved in documentation and used by generation after generation. Unlike Find a Grave and Billion Graves, transcriptions on interment.net are not editable except by the original submitter. Most cemetery websites post an alphabetical listing of burials for a single cemetery. Names in Stone allows the visitor to search an alphabetical listing of multiple cemeteries and view the actual grave location on an interactive map. One time I visited a local cemetery, and in order to help me find the headstones for my ancestors, they actually pulled their own cemetery up on Names in Stone. Ancestry, sorry about my slides there. Ancestry.com is an excellent resource for additional cemetery records. In this example, I selected Search, then Card Catalog, then typed in US for the title and cemetery in the keywords field. This retrieved 593 results. You can narrow your results further by using more keywords. These results are much broader than just headstones and cemetery transcriptions. They include death registers, death certificates, wills and probate records, obituaries, cemetery records, and other categories. The Family Search Wiki is another great place to access cemetery records. Links to these records can be found under the name of the state and then the category cemeteries. Here you can see the wiki page entitled Utah, United States Genealogy. Over on the right side under record types, one of the choices is cemeteries. If I click on that cemeteries link, it takes me to this section of online cemetery resources for Utah. You can see that there are many record collections to choose from. If you don't find what you're looking for on one website, check the others. Each one is a little different and may contain different information. You can also search in the wiki by the name of the county and then by cemeteries in the contents section. Here is the wiki page entitled Salt Lake County, Utah Genealogy. The contents section is along the left side of the page. Click on cemeteries. If I click that link, it takes me to this table of online cemetery records and additional information. Each place where there is blue text, it is a hyperlink to another wiki page, website, or record collection. Last, but certainly not least, you will find a wealth of cemetery records in the Family Search catalog. Like searching for other records in the catalog, it is important to look for records at every jurisdiction. Cemetery records are often held at the local level, in cities or towns, so they can be found under that jurisdiction in the catalog. But they can also be held at the county level or the state level. Here I have put in Salt Lake City, Salt Lake, Utah, United States in the place field, and cemeteries in the keyword field. The categories that come up in this search include cemeteries, but also related records like funeral homes and newspapers. I got 33 collections in my results. Next, I used the See Part of Utah Salt Lake button to change jurisdictions to the county. This is a really quick way to switch jurisdictions. This time I got 9 new results. Next, I used the See Part of Utah button to change jurisdictions to the state. That search gave me 46 new results. Other keywords you can use in your searches are funeral, death, burial, and obituary. And I bet you can probably think of even more ideas. Now let's talk about some tips for using cemetery records. Using other records and information, identify the name of the cemetery where your ancestor was buried. This information can often be found in an obituary, on a death certificate, a funeral program, or it could be part of your family's oral tradition. Maybe you've even visited the cemetery with your family members. Next, discover where that cemetery is located. Note that there may be several different cemeteries with the same name, even within the same county. Check for maps, online cemetery websites, Google, and other sources. Then locate cemetery records for that cemetery, as well as other pertinent records that may contain death or burial information. If you can, visit the cemetery in person to extract more evidence. There is nothing like being there to get the big picture. It is important to note that just finding cemetery records isn't enough. You should also compile evidence from all extant cemetery and related records for the time and place of your ancestor's death. It is helpful to create a timeline or table so all your information is in one place. Next, compare the evidence on those records and compare it to evidence in other records. Finally, try to reconcile conflicting data. I don't recall ever seeing all the records pertaining to one person's death agree on every single detail. Death can be a traumatic time, and many people forget things when they're under stress. There is almost always conflicting evidence that needs to be resolved. This requires evaluating all the sources and deciding which ones are the most reliable. So for the remainder of our time, I'm going to demonstrate how to use cemetery records in conjunction with other genealogical sources by presenting a short case study. This is Drozan Landry. He was born in Louisiana in 1861 to a large and well-known family. He married Euphémie Miguet, and they had a number of children. I wanted to document each of their offspring. So here's his person page on Family Search Family Tree as it looked when I did the research. If I scroll down, I can see 5 of his children listed here: Victoria, Laura, Elie, Wilfred, and Walter. However, in Drozan's obituary, it lists 7 surviving children: 2 daughters, Mrs. L.F. Landry and Mrs. Victoria Landry, and 5 sons, Remy, Elie, Wilfred, Whitney, and Walter Landry. Furthermore, in the 1900 U.S. Census, it states that Euphémie was the mother of 8 children, with 7 still living. There were 7 children in the household: Victoria, Remy, Laura, Elie, Willie, Wilfred, and Whitney. Walter was not mentioned, probably because he had not yet been born. The 1920 census shows that Walter was age 17, meaning he was born in about 1903. This information indicates that Drozan and Euphémie were likely the parents of at least 9 children. Unfortunately, I was not able to locate the Landry family in the 1910 census, even though their neighbors, including their son Remy and his wife, who lived next to them in 1900, were enumerated. I looked up Drozan on Find a Grave, where it notes he was buried in the Miguet Cemetery in Del Cambre, Iberia Parish, Louisiana. By scrolling down, I can see family members who have been attached to Drozan's memorial. It includes 7 children, of whom Victoria is notably absent. By looking for others with the surname Landry in the same cemetery, I located this memorial for Victoria and her husband Clomer. The 1900 census said that she was born in July 1884 rather than July 1885, so I wanted further evidence to show that this was indeed the daughter of Drozan and Euphémie. Euphémie's obituary provided the missing evidence. Mrs. Clomer Landry was included in the list of her surviving children. Although the relationship is clearly stated in the obituary, Victoria was also left off Euphémie's memorial on Find a Grave. Euphémie's death certificate corroborates the other information on her memorial. Although the Landry family has a lovely family plot in the Miguet Cemetery, not all of the children are buried there. Rémi and Laura were both buried in Our Lady of the Lake Cemetery, located in the same town and parish. Their headstones, if extant, have not been photographed for Find a Grave or any of the aforementioned cemetery websites, although these memorials are included on Find a Grave. 5 additional children's graves are documented on Find a Grave: Elie D. Landry, Willie Landry, Wilfred Landry, Whitney J. Landry, and Walter E. Landry. One of the 9 children of Drozan and Euphémie was still unaccounted for. Based on information in the 1900 census, he or she must have been born between the time of the couple's marriage, approximately 1882, and 1900, and passed away before 1900. None of the entries for Landry in either the Miguet or the Our Lady of the Lake cemeteries fits this description. However, we located one memorial on Find a Grave that could match. An unnamed Landry was born in October 1888 and buried in the St. Mary Magdalene Cemetery and Mausoleum in Abbeville, Vermilion Parish, Louisiana. This is the place where Euphémie was born and is very close to Delcambra, where the Drozan Landry family resided. Also known as the New Catholic Cemetery, 118 Landrys are buried there. If this person was an as yet unnamed infant who was born and died in October 1888, that would explain the sparse information in the other records. More research would be needed to confirm this, but it is a possible lead for the missing Landry child who died before 1900. In looking for more information on the children of Drozan and Euphémie, I located most of their obituaries in local newspapers. Victoria was known as Mrs. Clomer Landry. Her services were at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church, and she was buried in the Miguet Cemetery. Her maiden name was Victoria Landry, and she was a native of Vermilion Parish. She resided in Delcambra for most of her life and was survived by 2 sons, 1 daughter, 1 sister, and 3 brothers, who were named in the article. The Evangeline Funeral Home handled the burial arrangements. This article can lead to several others, namely Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church records, the Miguet Cemetery records, Louisiana marriage records, records for her surviving heirs, and Evangeline Funeral Home records. Rémi's obituary is very similar to Victoria's. His services were also held at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church, but he was buried there in the church cemetery. He was listed as a retired farmer, and the article names his parents as Mr. and Mrs. Drozan Landry and states that he was born in Delcambra. He was married to Edita LeBlanc and was survived by his wife, daughter, 2 sisters, and 3 brothers. Evangeline Funeral Home also handled his burial arrangements. Like her older siblings, Laura's funeral services were held at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church. She died in Abbeville, Louisiana, and was buried in the church cemetery, as was Rémi. She was a member of the Ladies' Altar Society and was survived by 1 son, 1 daughter, and 3 brothers. Evangeline Funeral Home handled the arrangements. Eli's services were also held at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church. He was buried in the Miguel Cemetery. Like his brother Remy, Eli was a retired farmer. He was the son of the late Mr. and Mrs. Drozan Landry. He was survived by 4 sons, 3 daughters, 4 brothers, and 2 sisters. Wilfred's funeral was also conducted at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church, and he was buried in the Miguel Cemetery. He was a native and lifelong resident of Del Cambra and died in Lafayette, Louisiana. He was survived by 2 sons, 2 daughters, and 1 brother, and Evangeline Funeral Home handled the arrangements. You may have noticed a pattern in the burial customs of the Landry family. I was not able to locate obituaries for either Whitney J. or Walter E., but knowing that they were buried in the Miguel Cemetery, I might guess that their funerals were held at Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church and that Evangeline Funeral Home possibly handled the funeral arrangements. Like many families, however, there is an anomaly. Drozan and Euphémie Landry's son Willie does not fit the mold. Although he was buried near family members in the Miguel Cemetery and his headstone appears similar to theirs, additional documents tell of his drastically different life story. The body of Willie Landry, aged 20, who was assassinated at Ray, Arizona, Thursday of last week, was buried at Del Cambra Wednesday. He had been shot in both eyes, through the heart and abdomen, nose broken, a deep and long gash on throat, and about 30 cuts about body. Ray, Arizona is a long way from Del Cambra, Louisiana. It also does not appear that Willie was in the family business of farming. One might even question whether this Willie Landry was from the same family as the others. Another news article expounds on the story and solidifies the identity of the assassinated Willie as the son of Drozan and Euphémie. According to the article, Willie was aged 21 and the son of Mr. Drozan Landry of Del Cambra. He was working as a bookkeeper in a copper mine when he was robbed and murdered in Ray, Arizona, possibly by Mexican outlaws. His body was brought home to Louisiana for burial. 2 years earlier, he had gone to California and then to Arizona. Arizona newspapers give much more detail on the event. Willie, known as the French boy to the locals, was essentially deputized by the constable, Finn Brown, to chase some horse thieves. They followed the outlaws to the mouth of Devil's Canyon. A woodshed there served as the hiding place for the thieves, who, when they were about to be discovered, shot the constable, killing him instantly. They then chased Willie for a mile down the canyon where they tortured and murdered him. The outlaws also killed 2 other men who were in the area, afraid that they were witnesses to their crimes. That was the fate of Frank Jesse Bacon, whom I mentioned earlier as having been murdered at the head of Devil's Canyon. Cemetery registers from Gila County, Arizona, have an entry for Willie Landry. It states that he was a ranch hand and was age 22. He was murdered on August 19, 1914, at the head of Devil's Canyon, and his body was shipped to Del Cambra, Louisiana, for burial. Although his surname and age are a little bit different on this record, the location where his body was shipped and the cause of his death match other records that positively identify this Willie as the son of Drozan and Euphémie. Willie's death certificate matches the information from the cemetery records, but states his cause of death as from gunshot wounds, Devil's Canyon, by unknown parties. The undertaker was the informant for the certificate and therefore did not know the names of Willie's parents. The document also states that his length of residence at the place of his death was only 6 months and that his usual residence was Del Cambra, Louisiana. After gathering and evaluating this evidence from various cemetery records, I determined that Drozan and Euphémie were the parents of at least 9 children, 8 of whom we can positively identify and who lived to adulthood. Furthermore, the children of the family generally stayed in Del Cambra, Louisiana, a town on the border of Ionia and Vermilion parishes. At least 2 of the sons worked as farmers. The family was affiliated with and likely attended Our Lady of the Lake Catholic Church. Most of the family members were interred in the Miguel Cemetery, although 2 children were buried at the church cemetery. The Evangeline Funeral Home took care of arrangements for most, if not all, of the family members, and a possible grave for the missing Landry child was located in the St. Mary Magdalene Cemetery in Abbeville. So after learning this new information, I was able to update Family Tree with the 3 additional children and their birth and death dates, as well as the death dates for the 4 children who had none listed. I also have a sensational but true story about Drozan and Euphemie's son, Willie, and his untimely death at the hands of outlaws in Devil's Canyon, Arizona. So that concludes this presentation on cemetery records. In summary, I have reviewed the history and background of cemeteries and cemetery records in the United States and characterized their genealogical value, especially when used in conjunction with other records. I have also demonstrated how to use the records and where to find them, and finished with a case study showing how cemetery records can help solve real-life research problems. And now we have a few minutes for questions, I believe. Let's see, I don't see our host here, so, oh, here she comes.
Julia, thank you so much for helping us understand all of the uniqueness that gravestones have. I was just so in awe of the stories that we can learn from those types of visuals. And I'm so glad that in the links that we're sharing with everyone today, you included so many resources and websites that can help us further our understanding of the cemeteries and all that they have to offer us. And we actually have hundreds of people that are tuning in, and some of them have questions. And guys, thank you so much for sharing where you're watching from. That's just so neat. We have people from Germany tuning in, from here in the States, and many of them were asking for your handout. And I have great news for you. Julia has a handout, and it's in the links, whether you're watching on YouTube or on Facebook or on X, Instagram, you name it. There are links that are going to be, or have either been posted or are now or will be posted in the next couple of minutes.
Before we
So
start with the questions, I want to
yeah.
apologize if I butchered any of the pronunciations of these names. I am not a French speaker, and so I can read it okay, but I apologize if I butchered the names and they're part of your family. So
Oh,
just
Julia,
wanted
you're so sweet
to
to
say
do that.
that.
I will tell you, it's as someone who's Hispanic, it's so funny because there's words like or names like Selena, or and someone will say, "Oh, it's Selena, it's Selena," and so it's kind of subjective, but yeah, it's we're so grateful that you're even trying. So thank you, Julia. Okay, so let's see, what questions are there? So yes, there is a handout. Thank you, everyone. We have more than 350 people tuning in right now. Thank you. Um, the only question is about merging. Um, Julia, are you familiar with any videos that are on rootstech.org, or that we've done recently that do talk about merging?
So yes, I know that just about weekly we have a family search family tree based webinar that's usually given by someone from the Family Search Library. And each of those goes into a lot of depth of how to use Family Tree. So how to add people, how to get started, how to merge, how to add sources, what to do if there's a mistake, how to make edits and things like that. So there are so many resources available on the Roots Tech website for those things. So I encourage you to look at those and watch the webinars and look at the handouts, and you will have plenty of help with those family tree questions.
Thank you so much and I remember, I think it was like a month ago that we had a class on that. So, for those of you that are asking about the merge feature, please, please, please just note that, like Julia said, rootstech.org, or here on Facebook or on YouTube, if you search for Merge feature family search, you can refer back to a video that has talked about that in the past. And then we also included a link to free virtual consultations from Family Search Library team members that can help you. So click on that link and you can set up some time with them. I did see a question from the gentleman that is tuning in from Germany. And the comment or the question, so his scenario is, so Guy from Germany says, I am looking for the burial situation of a great grandmother born in Wisconsin who emigrated to Europe, but died in the US. Any pointers, Julia, on what Guy from Germany can do to find what he's looking for?
So he's going to have to search all of the records that he has and look for additional records that might give clues about exactly where she was born and when she died. You really need to have that location in order to find cemetery records or burial locations. One of the great things about the online websites like Find a Grave, though, is you can do a general search for someone's name, if
Mm,
even if you don't know the location. But often there are many people with the same name, and if you don't have a place, at least a general place like a state and a county, then it's really hard to tell if it's for the same individual. Also, a lot of times when people pass away, the name that's on their headstone is not the name that you might have known them by. Maybe a woman remarried and you don't know her final name, or maybe she divorced and changed her name back, or maybe her family members called her a nickname and that's what they put on the headstone. So you really do need to extract all the clues that you can to
mm.
pinpoint the time and place and what their name might have been when they died. And that will help you narrow down what records you're going to look for burial.
Julia, these are such great recommendations. And I just want to echo what Julia said. I had a recent experience with Find a Grave, and it's one of her suggested websites to use where I was for the longest time looking for my grandfather's information. I never met him. He passed away before I was born. And I found his gravestone in Florida, and it was just so neat to see that it had some information about him having served in the Vietnam War. And it just goes to show just how valuable gravestones are, and it just takes some patience. But Julia, just really quickly, if there was one takeaway that you would hope that everyone, the hundreds of people that are watching today, would carry with them as they continue their journey of family history and use cemeteries to provide value for the questions that they're trying to answer, what would that be? What would that one takeaway be?
It would be look beyond the headstone. Even if there's no headstone, if you know where someone was buried, look for those additional records. Look for the obituaries, the funeral records, the records in the funeral home, or the cemetery registers, because they often contain so much more information than just a name and a death date. And that's where you're going to find the real value.
Thank you so much. And for those of you that are watching, if you have questions, please feel free to continue dropping them in the comments. We'll be answering questions even after this live stream is over. And just a reminder for those of you that are tuning in, we have the joy of sharing family search library experts, family history experts, and people that are industry friends. Every Thursday, they are leading out on these wonderful and just very educational live streams every Thursday at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. So thank you so much, Julia, for sharing your knowledge with us and showing all just how vivid the stories are when we look into headstones. And thank you, all of you, for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. Take care. Thank you. Bye bye. Thank you, Julia.